You're in UC Davis,
That's right.
and the auditorium behind you is what?
This is the Mondavi Center, which is the beautiful, gorgeous venue we have at UC Davis.
How many patrons does it seat?
It's just over 1,600. I mean, this is not your typical university theater. We have, one of the most beautiful theaters in the whole of California. We've had international orchestras tour it every year. St. Petersburg Philharmonic. We've had the New York Phil. We've had an association with the San Francisco Symphony, where they come and play about 3 concerts every year. We've had the LA Phil come to us as well. It's remarkable for a small city at the town of Davis to have this quality of a world-class venue.
You were born where?
I was born in Argentina, 4 hours south of Buenos Aires, in a city called Mar del Plata, which is a beautiful resort by the Atlantic Ocean. Nowadays, it's about 750,000 people big, so it's a relatively large city, though I still think it feels like a very small town.
How did you start your musical journey?
I come from a family that is not musical at all. My mom tells me that when I was about 2, I want to go like this, I would say to her. And I was, I didn't even know what it was called, a violin or what. But I said, Mommy, I wanna go like this. I want to do this. So she tried to find me a violin teacher when I was 2. At the time, like I said, it's a relatively large city, but music education was never something particularly strong there. Eventually, to make the long story short, a couple of years later, I think I was 4 by then, and my father, who was a medical doctor, he had a patient who happened to be a piano teacher, and she lived right across the street from us. When he mentioned that I wanted violin lessons, she said, I don't teach violin, but why don't we get him started on the piano? So that's how I started. Yeah, by the time I managed to get them to get me started with some lessons, I was 4.
That's really convenient that she was like across the street.
Literally, I could just cross the street. It was right in front of our house, and go there for my weekly lessons.
How long did you study with her?
It was several years. It was like a private conservatory that she was a professor for. So I completed that performance diploma through this conservatory. And then eventually, when I was already in my teens, I started lessons with another teacher that was very, very important to me as well, because he was also a wonderful tango pianist. He opened up a lot of doors for me. I mean, he was a classical concert pianist. He worked a lot on his Liszt and on his Mozart. He was very versatile. He also was a phenomenal tango musician, and so that really opened up a whole new horizon for me.
What was his name?
Juan Pedro Carleto.
Did you go through what we would call high school focusing on music?
There was not such a thing in my high school. And in fact, when I was in high school, I did play a lot of music, but it was in a different genre. I had a rock band, which was kind of the high school rock band. And I wrote a bunch of songs for them, and we would play covers of all sorts of things in Spanish and in English. And I played guitar and keyboards, and I was the singer for this little band. So that was my high school contribution. I remember we did a musical with the Beatles music, and we were just playing a lot of Beatles covers, for example. But in my high school, there was no path to choose music, except for this informal way in which I got together with some buddies, and we would go and represent the school in various different functions. But I kept myself busy with private music lessons. Eventually, I started the cello, and then by the time I was, 15 or so, I realized, I'd been composing ever since I started playing the piano as a little kid. I'd always been writing my little tunes. So I was, from the very beginning, obsessed with Mozart's music. So if I wasn't playing Mozart, I was playing something that I was doing myself. I was trying to copy how Mozart sounded. So eventually, as a 14, 15, 16-year-old, I realized by then, music had always been like my joy, my escape from the real world. And by that time, I played with ideas of becoming maybe an engineer, because I really liked maths and physics in school. I was very good at it. So I it was the two subjects I enjoyed the most in school. So I thought maybe I'll be some kind of engineer because that might be a good path for me. Since my dad was a doctor, a surgeon, for some time, I also toyed with the idea of, well, I'm gonna follow in his footsteps. But by the time I was already like 15, I think it had become clear to me that music was too important to me to be doing something else. And so I found a wonderful composer who lived in my city, who had been trained in the same university that I then applied to in Buenos Aires, the Catholic University, which really is and was at the time the very best place in the whole of Latin America. And so I went there to become a composer and a conductor. And there was at that time quite a rigorous process to get into the school. This is based all in like the French conservatoire system, where you do have to do a lot of solfège, a lot of oral skills, a lot of counterpoint and music theory. So even before you begin the degree, it was a 7-year degree. So very different from the bachelor's in the US, where you will be done in 4 years, or in the UK in 3 years you're done. This was a terminal degree. So it was 7 degrees. They didn't have 7 years. They didn't have a master's program. They didn't have a PhD. So they were kind of expecting you to be a very well-rounded musician by the time you finish that degree. That's what I did. When I was finishing high school, I started preparing myself for some of these exams, admission exams that I would have to take. And by doing so, I managed to skip one of those 7 years. I took all the exams ahead of time. And then I managed to then enroll in the second year of the program direct.
Sounds like you were kind of on this journey by yourself, by your own direction, by your own motivation. Was there anybody else around you that you would say, gee, I couldn't have done it without them? Or was it you?
I mean, yes, but of course the support of my family was very important, even though they didn't have the knowledge or the experience or any of the musical skills. Their emotional support was very, very important. And when you're into music, you're always like, especially in a place where it's not a musical place, I was a bit of the weird kid, in school, because he's always, there is a recess and he goes and plays the piano in a room. He's not out playing basketball with the others. Though I love playing soccer, that was my thing. But it felt for other kids maybe I was obsessed with music, and I clearly was. But I think there were a lot of people. I had friends who really supported me. They all thought maybe I was a little crazy, that music meant so much to me when they didn't get exposure to classical music at all. They didn't listen to it. And there was a weekend, and maybe instead of getting together with them, I would go to see the symphony. So there was a symphony in my hometown, and there still is. Many of the players in the symphony were my teachers. So it was very nice when I think I was 20, 23, 24 when I first conducted that orchestra. So to me, these are all the beautiful cycles in life when, those wonderful people that have given you so much and that you admire so much, and that you, for the first time, you heard the Tchaikovsky, Fifth Symphony then suddenly, many years later, still as a youngster, you're working with. I would say there were many people. Carleto, my piano teacher, was a very, very inspiring person to me for many reasons. He was a wonderful person as well. He had lots of cats at home. I would always go to Carleto's house, and there were always beautiful cats going around and playing with us when we were playing in 2 different pianos. He restored instruments. So in his home, he always had maybe 10 different pianos, and he would be remarkable at fixing them up and making them beautiful, both in terms of sound and the furniture. He was very skilled.
It sounds absolutely wonderful that those resources came together for you in kind of a classical music desert. That's really wonderful, and it's nice that you were able to piece all that together.
Yeah, and maybe it's unfair to say a desert, because like I said, there has been a wonderful symphony orchestra in my city, and I'm sure my if I hadn't been exposed to this orchestra, I am not sure I would have dreamed of becoming a conductor. I was probably 12 or so when I heard the Russian National Orchestra come on tour. And I remember there was a woman conducting this orchestra. Her name was Veronika Dudarova. And they played the Pathetique Symphony by Tchaikovsky. And I remember what a strong impression this made on me. It was the first time I heard a foreign orchestra. It was the first time I saw a woman conduct. And so they were all things that for me as a little boy, they meant a lot. And they made me dream that one day I could be doing this too. I think there's always moments in life like this. You don't necessarily notice at that time, but then you think 10, 20 years later, you think, what would have happened if I hadn't had that experience?
It's great that you were able to experience all of that when really, even for most of us who are interested in classical music, we have to accept the fact that we're rather a small segment of music listeners these days. And so anytime anybody is able to put together them for themselves, that kind of career pathway, I just think it's wonderful.
And also one of the incredible things is, back then, this is something I tell my students a lot of the times, is that, when I was growing up, getting a hold of recordings was quite difficult. We didn't have YouTube back then. We didn't have Apple Music or Spotify. So even just trying to compare, 5 or 10 recordings of a Beethoven symphony or God forbid, something obscure would have been really hard to get somebody to lend you a copy, or, that with a cassette tape recorder, you would be trying to get it when the radio was streaming it or something. So this is something really important to remember. Getting a hold of music scores in my city was extremely difficult. There was a very small music library. And even when I got to college in Buenos Aires, we had the best music library in Buenos Aires, which is not to say it was good. It was there was such a lack of materials. And I remember when I did a few trips to Europe, when I was already about to finish college, and I was thinking of going to Germany at that time, I managed to buy a bunch of scores that then I came back and I made, I brought either scores or Xerox copies, and I donated them to my library because it was really difficult to get recordings. In fact, I remember the Goethe Institute in Buenos Aires, where I learned German. They had a fantastic CD collection. So a lot of the contemporary music I started discovering was thanks to the Goethe Institute. So that's also something important to remember. And in that sense, there was a really good friend of mine that I made when I was learning German in Mar del Plata. I took a year before leaving for Buenos Aires. And there was this friend, he was an older guy, maybe 10 years older than me. And I was, say, 16, 17. He was in his late 20s probably. And he was also learning German. And he was very, very big on Wagner's music. In fact, that's the whole reason why he started taking German, was because he was so in love with Wagner's music. And so I remember with Martin, we would exchange recordings, and that was also in this desert, how you called it. It was nice to find people that were so into music that they would just start taking a language because of it. Well, the wealth of knowledge and information that we have available at our disposal is overwhelming, and sometimes too much so. So when you have I imagine as an undergraduate student, if you don't have adequate guidance nowadays, you suddenly want to compare, and instead of having 2 or 3 available, you have 300. So where do you start? So I think it can be paralyzing if you don't have the right kind of guidance.
How did you decide where you were going to go to undergraduate?
It was a bit, again, I think I'm a strong believer in some pivotal moments in life that you cannot, you can plan things, but then suddenly I have always felt the need to keep options open, and sometimes you meet someone or something happens that will almost decide your path for you. So as I was mentioning a little earlier, I've been very interested in the German language. I've become very good, fluent at it. And so my plans were to take advantage of this. The Goethe Institute gave me a scholarship for a couple of months to continue improving my German in Germany. So I went to Berlin for a couple of months. And at that time, I saw so many concerts, and I was just about to enter my last year of college. And so I had the opportunity to experience conducting workshops in the Hans Eisler School of Music. I met the composition professors at the Universität der Künste in Berlin. I was showing them my music. I was, still like something like 21 and completely unaware of what was happening in the world. But, going to the Berlin Philharmonic, I had the opportunity to see Heinz Holliger, the wonderful oboe player, composer, conductor. He was the guest conductor for the evening. And I remember how I really loved his music. And so I went to talk to him backstage, and he was kind enough to receive this ignorant 20-something-year-old, early 20s. And I showed him a couple of my compositions. And he was so kind to give me a lot of his time there backstage when a lot of friends were waiting for him. And he was generous to offer me his time. So these experiences were so inspiring when somebody you've just experienced, at the top of the profession are generous enough to offer you their time. So this is the kind of experience that to me was so very, very eye-opening. So like I said, I was planning on coming back and staying in Berlin and doing graduate school there. I remember meeting with Friedrich Goldman, the professor at the UDK, and I really liked him, and I thought there was a lot that I could learn from him. However, when I came back to Buenos Aires, my last year, my senior year, is one of those things that just happened by chance or not. And there was a wonderful conductor coming to teach a master class at my school. And my professor chose me as one of the students to conduct for him. And I remember I arrived and immediately called me to do, we were doing Mozart's Requiem. And so it was, one of those moments, you only have 15, 20 minutes on the podium with the orchestra and this teacher that you've never met before. But he was so excellent and so very different. I mean, my first conducting teacher was wonderful as well, but they both were so incredibly different. When one had been much more technical and very rigorous about form and structure, the other one was all about breathing and about expression and about phrasing and shaping. So it felt like it was just what I needed. So anyhow, I had a very good encounter with him during this masterclass. His name is Gerardo Edelstein, and he's still the professor at Penn State, which is where I ended up going after college. So we had such a strong connection that I thought I have to pursue this. And I was lucky enough to be offered a full ride at Penn State. And it was a wonderful couple of years for me there.
And after Penn State?
And then after that, I ended up pursuing a PhD in composition, which was a scary thing to do because, I thought in order to, even of those 2 years that I've been at Penn State, I've been working very hard on certain corners of the repertoire that I hadn't done so much of before. But even though I was so working in a very intensive way on my conducting, I'd also managed to compose here and there. In fact, while I was at Penn State, I wrote a woodwind quintet that I sent out to a competition in Seoul, in South Korea. And it was the first time that I was in Asia. Thanks to that, they chose me as a finalist, and they flew me to Seoul, and I ended up winning this competition. And so it was a wonderful experience. So I managed to keep my composer hat on, even though I was pursuing graduate school in conducting. And so then the scary thought was, in order to develop as a conductor, you need an orchestra. But you kind of are able to still develop as a composer, even if you're not enrolled in a composition program. That was my comparison point. But no matter what, there was a teacher at SUNY Buffalo that I really admired, and I knew people who had studied under him. And this is a school which has a great contemporary music program. This is where Morton Feldman had been a professor. This is a place where they have the famous, prestigious June in Buffalo Festival. So I corresponded with David Felder, who is this composer I wanted to work with, and he's just an outstanding composition teacher. So I ended up, again, once more, ditching logic, and you have other plans, but you know what, I really would like to try this. I mean, I had to make myself very brave to take this step, because I thought this might be the end of me as a conductor. I might not ever conduct again, but you know what, it doesn't matter if it has to be. I mean, I love composing as well, so I'm going to take this step. It's one of those things of life that if you're too careful and you don't take those steps, I think you're restricting yourself too much. So I ended up going to Buffalo for my PhD in composition. I was assigned, I remember my job as a TA was to conduct the new music ensemble. So that in itself meant, I'm going to still keep my conducting hat on. I can do this. And then, but something else happened, which also changed it all for me. It was only a few months after I had been there, maybe 2 or 3 months, and I'd never been to any of the orchestra rehearsals or anything. But the chair of the music department calls me up one night, a bit of in haste, with a sort of an emergency, and tells me that the conductor of the orchestra was stranded in New York City and he was ill, he couldn't fly. So he said, "Can you conduct the concert?" And of course I said, "Yes, I'll do it, no problem." And then I found out what the repertoire was, which was actually great. They were doing Beethoven's Fifth, and they were doing Fauré Péléas, and then there was a new piece, a world premiere by a PhD composer. So I remember the next day I arrived, and the concert was in the evening, something like 7 p.m. And we had a short warm-up rehearsal with the orchestra. The very first time they met me at 6 p.m., we had maybe half an hour to just go introduce myself and say, "Hi, you guys, don't worry about it, we'll get through this." Because I remember the look in their eyes. They were like, "Where's our conductor? Who are you?" So I think the chair was there to make introductions and explain that I was there just on his request and just trying to get them through. And things went well enough. I mean, the previous conductor was already on his way out. His contract was expiring at the end of that year. And it was shortly thereafter. I mean, the concert went well enough that they offered me the job to conduct the orchestra. So that was my first conducting job.
I'm sorry, which orchestra?
This is the University at Buffalo, SUNY Buffalo. While I was a graduate student there pursuing my PhD, they hired me as a lecturer to be the new director of the orchestra. It all ended up working out. That's what I was trying to say from the beginning. If you speculate too much and only try to do the one path, and this is the only thing that you think is going to work, it restricts you sometimes. I mean, just trusting your instincts and believing that things will sort themselves out eventually. It's been a very important lesson for me.
Independent of the people who taught you, are there conductors that you particularly admire?
Many, and some of them I've been fortunate to work with, to be their assistant conductor. So of course, Michael Tilson Thoman is somebody who comes to mind for so many reasons, a very inspiring figure, a marvelous musician. And I was lucky to work with him as his assistant and cover conductor with the San Francisco Symphony for 2 years. The amount that you learn from seeing somebody rehearse, deal with issues that come up, find creative solutions. Some of the weeks I worked with him, a lot of these concerts were being recorded, like the Schumann Symphony Cycle. So I was, asked as assistant to be the extra pair of ears, taking notes in the hall, bringing notes to him, to the recording engineer, who was another wonderful, wonderful person. So yes, there are many conductors, living conductors that I admire very much. Peter Edvosh is someone else. Hungarian conductor composer that to me was a very, very inspiring figure, role model. I was also lucky to assist him and work with him in Germany at the Donaueschingen Musiktage. So knowing a lot of wonderful composers through him. Martin Brabins has also been a very inspiring figure for me. He was one of my teachers, my mentors. I also assisted him with the BBC Symphony Orchestra in London. And there are many others around. I never met Niklas Harnoncourt, for example, but he's somebody I've admired so much. Carlos Kleiber, I wish I'd been able to even see him conduct live. Simon Rattle, I saw him conduct more than once. Gustavo Dudamel as well. I mean, there are so many people that have opened doors, that have inspired generations. And I think what's important to remember as a musician is that you don't have to be good at everything. It's important to see what your strengths are and to be able to identify what you're really good at, which is not to say you're not going to do something else. But I think it's important for performers, for composers, for conductors to see what it is. What is my strongest suit, and how can I contribute best to the music community?
What do you think your strongest suit is then?
So I knew you were going to do that.
Of course.
Probably because I'm a composer and a conductor, I enjoy extremely working with living composers. I enjoy creating opportunities for them. You know, what started as a personal interest because it's something I really liked and enjoyed. I mean, I love doing Mozart, which is my first love, and I could be doing Mozart, you know, all the time. Part of the repertoire that I was breathing as a child, and that I love. And you know, when I was lucky enough to record an album with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra on Mozart music with a wonderful English soprano, Elizabeth Watts. It was very well received. You know, our CD was chosen as Recording of the Month by the BBC Music Magazine, Gramophone, Guardian, all the main publications. They gave us 5 stars, 4 stars. Classic FM picked it up as well as a feature recording. So we were very lucky in the way it was received. So yeah, maybe I could be doing this all the time because I love it so much. But wouldn't that be selfish of me? Wouldn't that be, is there not something else I could contribute to our contemporary world? I mean, female composers have been neglected. There are so many underrepresented composers. How many African-American composers have you listened to? How many Latinx composers or Native American composers have you listened to? So I see myself as somebody who could do something about this in a modest way. If I can be a vehicle for creating more opportunities for these composers that have been neglected on the concert platform, I think our world will be a little better by it. And I say this in a most modest kind of way, but I do think what we do as artists is a reflection of our community, and our world is changing. It's becoming more diverse, and I definitely want to be an advocate and an ally for LGBT composers, for people that have not had a place, people that have been neglected and oppressed. So this is where I think what my strong suit is: create programs that are open-minded, that are creative. It's almost like being a chef. It's not like I'm going to throw a burger, a carrot, and whatever else there is around. I'm going to think really carefully about what it is that I'm featuring at any given evening. It has to be a holistic experience. So for me, the format of any overture, any concerto, and any symphony that I'm in the mood for conducting, that doesn't work. That to me is very lazy, and it's been done too much. So I try to think of programs that have a concept, that have an idea in which there is a connecting thread. So I think that's where I would say my strongest suit is in being able to come up with programs that are, to me, beautiful, inspiring, and that are more inclusive and more diverse, and that they really advocate for more equity in our world.
Have you come across a piece recently by one of the underrepresented composers that really knocked your socks off?
Many. I mean, one of the other composers I interviewed recently is one that Miguel Hart Bedoya has supported for many years. He also comes from Peru. He composed this piece called Fiesta. Jimmy Lopez Bellido is his name. And so this is a really cool piece that he wrote already 10, 15 years ago, but it's been picked up by more than 100 orchestras. His music is being played everywhere. So Concertgebouw recently premiered one of his new pieces. I think he's working on his third symphony, Jimmy, already. So yes, his incredible ear for color, for texture, I think is very welcome in our world. There is also a wonderful Iranian composer called Aida Shirazi, that I've known personally for a number of years now. In fact, last year I commissioned a piece from her called Umbra, the shadow, and written for strings, which we actually performed in Sacramento with the Camellia Symphony during quarantine when we were rehearsing outdoors, everybody socially distancing and wearing masks. So yeah, there are many, I mean, there are many composers whose music I come across and I think, wow, this really deserves a place on the concert platform, and more people need to be aware of the beauty that there is in this kind of music.
Indeed. And the sad fact is, I know people don't like me to say this, but if you're a composer, if you get one performance, you're lucky. So it is really important to hone in on those, really have some promise, but unless you become an advocate for them, you're only going to hear it one time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's impossible as you yourself to just become aware of everything. So I do ask for a lot of help and recommendations. I mean, I get a lot of submissions all the time, but at the same time, I try to give each person a chance. And if I'm able to, I'll respond. But also, there are people there are associations who can really help with this. So when I was conducting in Amsterdam a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic started, December 2019. It was one of the last few concerts I did abroad in Amsterdam and then in Germany with the Nordwestdeutsche Philharmonie. And while I was there, I requested a meeting with a woman in one of the archives in Amsterdam. And she kindly met with me for coffee. I was interested in some of the female composers from Amsterdam that had also been oppressed, during the Nazi regime. And so she gave me a lot of information, a couple of CD recordings. And thanks to her is that I've come across a younger Dutch composer called Mathilde Wantena. And I'm going to be performing one of her pieces next year here in the US. So I think it's really important to reach out to people. I mean, we all live in different cocoons and we have the people we know, but I also like expanding these networks and asking and finding out more about what's been happening and what is going on now in different parts of the world as well.
You're at UC Davis and you're in charge of, within the music department, the conducting program.
Yes.
And how long have you done that?
I started in 2009. I was 29 when I was hired. I was a very young professor when I first came here.
You're conductor of the UC Davis Orchestra.
Right.
How large is that? I know it probably varies from year to year, but
it varies from year to year. But we're a fully fledged orchestra between 85 to 120, depending on what we're doing. In fact, right now we are releasing a CD recording. Let me see if I don't know if this is going to be able to show it.
All right.
That's a new CD coming out on Center Records. And it features the UC Davis Symphony Orchestra in 3 works, and also the Munich Radio Orchestra, all conducted by me. But I'm very proud of this project because there is probably only a handful of university orchestras that have released recordings on commercial labels. And this is repertoire that is all very close to my heart, but also extremely hard to play. I mean, this is even some professional orchestras will shy away from doing. This is the Ligeti Violin Concerto with Miranda Cookson, another work for violin and orchestra by Lutoslavsky called Chain 2, wonderful violinist called Maximilian Haft, who is American, and also born in Sacramento, but has resided in Europe for the last 15 years or so. He plays with all the main new music ensembles, Contrechamp in Switzerland, and he's been a soloist in a number of European orchestras. I mentioned this because you asked about the size. One of the pieces on this CD is the gargantuan proportions Amérique by Edgar Varese. So that requires 14 percussionists, 5 trombones, including a contrabass trombone, which we were borrowing from the San Francisco Symphony, 2 tubas, all quintuple woodwinds, including 2 contrabassoons, 8 horns. I mean, it's humongous. So that's one of the pieces on that CD.
He's a composer we don't hear much about anymore.
Yeah, and I think in Europe he's played more widely than here. In fact, the first time I heard this piece live, Amérique by Varese, it was in London with the BBC Symphony at the Barbican. And they don't have such a large stage, so it was really packed to the edges. I believe it was James Conlon who was conducting this. So that's the first time I heard the piece live. And I probably heard it live once more. I remember when San Francisco Symphony did it, and they've been such an inspiration to me with the programming. They did this American Mavericks programming, and I can't remember quite if they included it. He was not really American. Of course, he was French, but he was definitely a maverick.
Yes. Tell me about the Camellia Symphony.
It's a wonderful, wonderful organization, and they have been so incredibly open to embrace this idea of a programming that is a lot more inclusive. So we collaborate with a lot of living composers. We've been doing a lot of female composers recently. We had Erjin Kang, who is this wonderful violinist who was, instrumental in the rediscovery of Florence Price's music. So she came and played the second violin concerto with us. I've been their music director since 2012, and it's just been a great ride. I'm just very, very grateful for the openness we've received also in the community in terms of support, because you need the donors behind this as well. You need people to continue donating, despite the fact that you're not only doing Brahms and Tchaikovsky, which is what a lot of orchestras do. We have openly expressed that, yes, we are going to perform some war horses. I mean, we did. I like I said before, finding programming that will give the listener something new always. So yeah, you might be coming to the concert because of the Jupiter Symphony, but I'm going to make sure that, for example, in that program we also did Gabriela Lina Frank, the Elegía Andina, and we did the world premiere of a piano concerto by a Guatemalan composer, which was inspired by 3 fresco paintings that were stolen from a church in Guatemala. I like to offer these experiences. It's like I said before, it's like going to a restaurant and the chef sometimes tells you this is the next dish and it has to be, I'm going to serve it in this order, and this is the wine that I'm going to pair with it. So I think it's quite a good image to equate going to the symphony to this.
How large is the Camellia Symphony?
We have about 85 musicians. We perform 8, 9, 10 programs a year, depending. We do some community outreach, so it's an orchestra very involved with music education as well. We have 2 youth orchestras, and I have a wonderful assistant conductor, Paulo Reyes, and he directs the youth orchestras. So we play every year. A lot of the outreach that I personally do is I try to expose more and more people to what it is to experience live music from an orchestra. There are many people in the community who haven't had the chance, so we've applied for grants, and we've been very lucky to be able to offer free admission to our concerts to kids who come from refugee families. There is one of the schools in Sacramento that I've worked closely with their music teacher, who is absolutely wonderful. Her name is Gail Winnie. So many of her students speak English. They came from Syria, from Afghanistan, from Iraq. And so meeting all these kids and their families for the first time coming to the symphony, it's been absolutely wonderful. Many times they would send me afterwards little notes to me, to the musicians, written in Farsi, in Arabic. It's just been, so we try to do a lot of this kind of work for the community. Very nice to meet you.
Hey, it was great meeting you too. Congratulations on all of your success.
Thank you so much. And thanks for doing this and creating more awareness of what we're trying to do here.
You bet. Take care of yourself.